Against the backdrop of the global trade war that has been intensifying for several months between China and the United States, the most unexpected diplomatic and military twist of the year has occurred. India has made an unprecedented move by deciding to purchase Chinese fifth-generation fighter jets. This decision came as a real shock to Washington, since as recently as the summer of 2025, the United States had been actively promoting its offer to supply India with the F-35 Lightning II aircraft, which were considered a symbol of American technological superiority. However, against the backdrop of new tariffs imposed by Donald Trump against India and the growing trade tensions between the two countries, New Delhi unexpectedly froze negotiations with Lockheed Martin, officially citing issues of strategic independence. According to sources in India's Ministry of Defense, cited by the Economic Times, India is tired of being a hostage to U.S. political decisions. It all began when Washington imposed tariffs on Indian steel and pharmaceutical products, dealing a blow to the export sector and causing a sharp cooling in relations between the countries. Despite attempts by American diplomats to convince Delhi that this was only a temporary measure, behind closed doors in the Indian government, Trump's decision was perceived as an act of pressure. It was then that India's military establishment began discussing alternative paths to modernize its air force without dependence on the United States. According to the reputable analytical center Global Defense Review, in early September during a closed meeting in New Delhi, representatives of India and China held their first informal talks on the supply of fifth-generation fighter jets, presumably the J-31B, an upgraded version of the Chinese stealth aircraft adapted for export. For China, this became a historic moment. For the first time, Beijing is ready to sell such a high-tech military system to a country that until recently was considered its strategic rival. Relations between India and China had long been tense. Border clashes in the Himalayas, mutual accusations of espionage, competition in South Asia. But today, against the backdrop of the U.S. tariff war against both countries, geopolitical logic has shifted. According to Reuters Asia, by the end of September, a delegation from Beijing arrived in New Delhi under the cover of an economic forum, where insiders say details of a major contract were discussed. The deal could exceed $8 billion, and the first aircraft are expected to be delivered in 2026. China has apparently offered India unique terms, not only preferential financing through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, but also partial transfer of technology. For India, this was the decisive factor. Unlike the United States, China is willing to share technology, which will allow India's industry to develop its own fifth-generation program, AMCA. An official from India's defense ministry told The Hindu that this is not just a contract to purchase aircraft, it is a strategic step aimed at creating a technological balance in Asia. The White House has so far refrained from official comment, but according to Politico, Trump in private called the situation a stab in the back. Within the United States, India's decision is seen as the biggest failure of American foreign policy in Asia in the past decade. India, long considered a key Washington ally in the region, is effectively moving under China's technological influence. According to sources close to the U.S. National Security Council, an emergency meeting has been convened with representatives of the Pentagon and the State Department. The main objective is to assess the consequences of this deal and the possibility of imposing sanctions on Indian companies involved in the project. However, experts believe this will only accelerate the rapprochement between Delhi and Beijing. China, for its part, sees this deal not merely as commercial profit, but as a powerful political signal. Beijing is gaining the opportunity to use India as a partner in its confrontation with the United States. Chinese state media have already begun hinting at a strategic partnership. The newspaper Global Times wrote that India is making the right choice in favor of a multipolar world where decisions are not made in Washington. This thesis was echoed by Indian analysts. Rahul Menon, professor of international relations at Jamia Millia Islamia University, told NDTV that India is tired of being a pawn between superpowers and is now choosing its own path. He added that the purchase of Chinese aircraft is not capitulation, but an act of maturity. Although the deal has not yet been officially confirmed, Indian military circles are already discussing a joint program for the maintenance and modernization of the fighters. including the production of certain components in Bangalore. According to Defense World India, several major defense contractors have already been instructed to prepare production facilities. Interestingly, following this information, the Indian rupee began to strengthen, and the stock market reacted positively to the news of a potential Chinese loan. Economists explain this simply. Cheap Chinese financing will help India partially offset the impact of U.S. tariffs, and expanding technological cooperation will reduce dependence on Western suppliers. In Washington, however, irritation is growing. When asked about the deal, Trump told reporters, "If India wants to buy Chinese, then let it not ask us for protection later." This reaction only added fuel to the fire, as such statements are perceived as blackmail in India. Moreover, according to BBC Hindi, India's Ministry of External Affairs is already preparing a response statement, emphasizing that India makes decisions based on its own interests, not external pressure. Meanwhile, cautious optimism reigns in the corridors of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As reported by the South China Morning Post, Beijing views the deal as the beginning of a new era of trust between the two Asian giants. Chinese experts believe that selling fighter jets to India is not only an economic, but also a symbolic step capable of reshaping the entire security architecture in Asia. If India and China manage to establish military cooperation, the balance of power in the region will shift sharply, primarily against U.S. interests. Against this backdrop, Washington is already losing support not only from India, but also from several Southeast Asian countries, where Chinese investments continue to grow despite sanctions pressure. For India, this step could become part of a broader strategy, using China as a counterbalance to U.S. influence while not becoming its vassal. And while the world speculates about when exactly India and China will announce the signing of a historic contract, behind the scenes everything has already been decided. According to sources from Nikkei Asia, technical specialists from China have already arrived in Bangalore under the guise of civil aviation consultants to prepare the infrastructure for future deliveries. There is a sense of change in the air, as if the world is entering a new era where old alliances collapse and former enemies become partners. Washington is in disarray. According to his advisors, Trump is demanding an intelligence report on how India could do this. But perhaps the answer is simple. India is tired of waiting to be treated as an equal. If just yesterday it was an ally of America, today it is becoming an independent power around which a new Asian order is beginning to take shape. And this moment, when India, a country with a population of over 1 billion and the ambitions of a superpower, extends its hand to China, may mark the beginning of the end of American dominance in Asia.